And the model and the framework we use in the book is define, protect, champion. So really, it all starts with an organization having a clear mission. We call it a higher purpose. It'll look really different across organizations, but so clear from the founding of Blue Trust, that higher purpose that you all have.
You're listening to the Wisdom for Wealth for Life podcast, brought to you by Blue Trust.
In this episode, we have Senior Private Wealth Advisor and National Managing Director Kerry Mallory from Blue Trust, and Becca Spradlin, author of the book Lead on Mission. Business owners, church leaders, and organizational leaders can all remember creating the mission statement. But how do you prevent your mission drift in your culture? Becca shares with us her insights on how to stay on mission. Let's listen in now.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Today you are in for a treat. Author Becca Spradlin is here to talk about her newest book, Lead on Mission. So if you're a leader at home or at work, this is a great book for you. So welcome to our podcast, Becca.
Thanks so much. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, so we're going to get to talk about your book in a minute, but I was impressed to hear that this is not your first book. You were actually co-author, along with someone we know well, Peter Greer, on the Mission True workbook. And then you've founded an organization called On Mission Advisors that helps Christian leaders champion their higher purpose. So I sense a theme here, Becca, that there's something about mission that's important to you, about not drifting from mission. So what makes you so passionate about this topic?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, my journey in all this started with Peter Greer in the book Mission Drift that you mentioned. That was hard to believe. That was 10 years ago. And prior to that, I was working at a rating agency and joined the Hope International team where Peter Greer's CEO. And the book Mission Drift was just coming out, and they said, can you help us develop an assessment we can use internally to know not if, but where we're drifting? So 2014, again, like 10 years ago, we started piloting this assessment inside of Hope International. As the book got traction, more and more folks were asking for help outside of the organization. And so On Mission was born out of all of that, of that interest of individuals and leaders really wanting to put their faith forward and avoid mission drift going forward. So it's been quite a journey these last 10 years, but yeah, super passionate about helping Christian leaders in the nonprofit and business spaces really integrate their faith and elevate that.
Well, like you, I work with a lot of Christian business leaders, and I see day in, day out, they want to build a great business, and they want their great business to have a greater purpose, right? But we hear it often how hard it is to stay on point with your mission and your values. It's easy to drift. I mean, we get busy. The world's pressing in. Perhaps we're not as intentional as we should be or were in the beginning. So I'm curious, how does your new book, the Lead on Mission book, how is it designed to help?
Absolutely. Well, it was those same realizations you just shared. That was the motivation to write the book. I had the privilege of doing a research fellowship with Seattle Pacific University. And the area of focus I chose was how businesses both integrate their faith and then how they drift off mission as well. So Peter's book, Mission Drift, really focused on the problem in the nonprofit sector. But what about businesses that take that step of courage to really integrate their faith? And it's difficult, I'd say more difficult for a business to do this. But even though they make that kind of uphill decision to do that, what causes them to drift over time? And the more cases I spoke to, the more leaders I spoke to, I realized that just what you've come to realize in your work, this happens a lot. And I think it's possible that we can take steps, and there are organizations that are taking steps to avoid this, to mitigate the risk of drift over time. And so I wanted to raise the problem, but also give solutions and give cases of organizations that have done this for decades and are still on mission.
That's one thing I really love about your book. The way you approached it was not just in the theoretical or the hypothetical, but actually real life case studies from organizations, many of whom we're familiar with and many we're not, but then using those case studies to reveal practical strategies that we as business leaders can implement. So I love that case study approach that you've done. I also went to business school, so I really enjoy case studies. But just thinking about, there's one particular case study in the book that's near and dear to my heart. It's about Blue Trust, and so I'm just curious, how did you learn about us in the first place, and then what made you, after you started, we had an initial conversation. What made you want to include us in your book about leading on mission?
Absolutely. Yes. Well, part of the fun of the research project was just getting to connect with different leaders. And like you, I love a good case study. I prefer books with case studies and stories, not just theory, like how are people practically doing this in today's age and today's culture. And Mike Shara with C12 connected us. And honestly, going into the conversation, it was, the things I was expecting was to learn, what is Blue Trust doing with their clients as you seek to help encourage them to discern with the Lord, how to give, how to manage their finances, how to even lead their businesses or transition ownership in a way that's aligned with their values. So I went into our conversation thinking about that, and it was just really fun for me to learn more about Blue Trust's journey, actually, as a company, as a case, to do this. And the model and the framework we use in the book is define, protect, champion. So really, it all starts with an organization having a clear mission. We call it a higher purpose. It'll look really different across organizations, but so clear from the founding of Blue Trust, that higher purpose that you all have in the work. It's not just about excellence in financial services and management. It's much more than that. And so that clear purpose has been there since the beginning. But as you shared with me about the trust structure recently put in place when the company went private, and this was in 2022, this purpose protection trust is a great example of the second piece we've defined: protect. How are organizations putting structures in place? And there's all sorts of structures you can use, but from a governance perspective, that purpose protection trust is a great one to do exactly what the name indicates, to really codify that higher purpose and add an extra kind of check and balance for the organization to have going forward. So, not getting involved in, the ownership and management decisions, but those key decisions related to the mission, related to maybe larger acquisitions you might consider, something of a certain threshold, you have that extra layer to make sure an organization stays on mission. So that was really neat to see. So we got the clear definition, that protection, one example of the protections you all have in place. And then the last piece is championing. So this is really where organizations think forward looking. What are we doing with our people to make sure that we are not just cultivating faith in the faith dimension today, but we're perpetuating that to future generations of leadership. So I think things like leadership development, succession planning, alignment, and goal setting, I think these are things that can often be overlooked, especially the succession planning and leadership development. Those are consistent weaknesses I've seen across nonprofits, for-profits. Folks it's hard to have the bandwidth to think ahead like that. So it's really encouraging to see that you guys had those things in place, and even success around your goal setting to help give away $1 billion. I think you guys set that for a 10-year goal and accomplished it in 3. So again, back to the defining and aligning your culture around that. It was really neat to see how you're kind of hitting on all of those pieces. And Blue Trust has been doing this like 45 years or more. So that experience of doing it, not just for 5 or 10 years, but for decades, is also something I was really looking for in the case studies we picked for the book, those ones that have done this for a while, and showing what we can learn from them.
Well, let's tease out a few of those in each category. So under the define, it seems kind of common sense, Becca, that of course you want to define what your mission is. 45 years ago, our founder, Ron Blue, sat down and came up with the fact that we wanted to help Christians free up resources to fulfill the Great Commission. And that still today is our defining mission. So but it isn't, it seems common sense, but so what advice would you give companies that have maybe even have something today in place? What would they do to make sure that they're staying on point, that it's clear for them?
Absolutely. Well, there's two things. And in the book, we try to make this clear, especially for the organizations that are maybe newer on this journey. It's not about putting a Bible verse on a wall or values on a wall. Like that's part of it, but the leadership needs to be living this out. And I think if you have a track record like Blue Trust does of raising up leaders who are aligned and passionate, they're excited about that vision. They're attracted to the organization because of that clearly defined mission and purpose. If you can do that over time, that puts you in a much, much better position. So always starting with living out the values before, even if you haven't had them articulated really well yet. So it's gotta live beyond the words on the wall.
So with that
And
defining.
being lived out authentically is
Right, right, authentically. Because I think one of the things that I struggle with is you read core values and it says we want to have we want to have high integrity, or we want to do with excellence. But that could just mean so many different things to different people. And so I love what your advice is, and in the book it goes into more detail around the practical ways that you can be drive that clarity home. Define. So that there's no question what excellence means in your organization, or what integrity means in your organization, or what your mission means. Okay. So, for us, we're a larger company with 450 employees. If you're not that big of a company, you couldn't put in a purpose protection trust, for example. You may not need that. What are some other things that you would advise business leaders listening that they need to have in place to help ensure protection?
absolutely. I think one of my favorite practices I've seen, this would be a smaller organization that was considering selling, is they took the time. So if you're a business owner and you have a company and you're thinking about selling it, whether it's to the next generation of your family or outside of your family, really defining what are those priorities you have as a business owner in the transaction in terms of both the continuity and the performance, but also the values and the culture. Because so many leaders, I think, are really disappointed in that kind of post-sale remorse, seeing how quickly, and it's in, I mean, the cases showed it would happen in months that the culture just totally deteriorates. So I think really defining what matters to you as a business owner and writing down those sale conditions. We have a case in the book and those sample conditions that would make the sale more, aligned with the values that you have. I think that's something a company of any size can do. Um, More and more companies are looking to transition. It's in that ownership transition piece that we see a lot of the drift happening. So a lot of the protections is around the ownership, the governance, things you might have in place if you're thinking about transitioning. More companies are also thinking about ESOP structures as well. And then again, it becomes more of elevating that question of the board and the role of the board and vetting and developing the board to make sure that alignment continues into the future.
Yeah, you mentioned a board. Many of those small and medium-sized businesses, the owners don't want to give up control to a board necessarily, or even just have that formal structure that comes along with it. I'm just curious, how have you seen an advisory board be effective in those cases?
Absolutely. And that's kind of where we would recommend starting for this smaller organizations. It could be informal. Some folks use kind of their peer membership groups as their quote unquote advisory board. But I think it starts with those people around you. As a leader, you need this, whether you feel like organizing it or not.
Right.
Folks that are aligned around you, praying with you and for your business, because spiritual warfare is real. And as someone who wants to promote their values in the workplace, that's an uphill climb, right? So start informally thinking about, I'd recommend, someone maybe a CPA, a lawyer, thinking of those skill set that are both trusted and aligned with you, but also have some skills that are relevant to your work, maybe some industry experience too, and getting feedback, starting informally doing that. I think you'll start to see the value of it pretty quickly. So I think starting with an informal advisory board is great. And then more formal board structures is really when you're starting to think about that next generation of what this looks like beyond you and your tenure. And I think more leaders and business owners need to be thinking about that if they do want to see those values preserved. And I hope that they do.
Right, yes. Well, you mentioned an easy place to start is to gather with other like-minded leaders. that can be in prayer for you, that can challenge you. I think of groups like you mentioned, C12 already. That's a wonderful one. Convene. I know you've been a speaker at Convene a number of times. Those are two wonderful workplace business peer-to-peer advisory groups that our listeners could get involved with. And then you could form an advisory board yourself, which doesn't have the same formal structure as a board. It's more like what it sounds. They provide advice to you on a regular basis. Okay.
Right.
How about our final piece? Remind our listeners what the final piece is. If it's define, protect, and
Champion. So this is all about the people, and it's all about the who and the forward looking. I think of protect as our defensive. This is our offensive. What are we doing to really advance this beyond us, beyond our tenure? So start to think not just 10 or 20, but 50 years out. What are we doing today to think about that kind of long-term perspective? So this gets to the culture, I think, both the training, I mean, everything from onboarding. You already mentioned values on a wall. How are we kind of hardwiring those values into our work every day? How do we define what those behaviors look like, and how do we hold each other accountable, certainly, but also celebrate? I know that's part of what you all do, really celebrating mission fulfillment, celebrating the values lived out. And I think there's a lot organizations can do. Even small organizations can just, give high fives out for the good work that they're seeing being done that's aligned with those values. So it's the formal, it's the informal, it's that culture that you're building. And then again, with a clear mission, you can be attracting people to that higher purpose. I think even more so now, younger generations want to work for a business that has a higher purpose, right? It's more than just profit. So this is an asset for you as a Christian business owner and leader. It's really investing in that culture. And I already mentioned kind of the leadership development and succession planning. Spending time on that is really, really critical. And I emphasize that because when I survey and evaluate organizations, so often most of them have not quite gotten to succession planning. Everything else is going well, but they haven't gotten there. And that really can put their organization at risk, especially if the define and protect pieces aren't very strong. So really encouraged to think about even just an informal succession plan, or just even starting to think about and have that conversation is really, really important.
Well, I love the celebrate piece of it here at Blue Trust. We love to celebrate the behaviors that we want to see repeated. And so for example, our core values, we have core value awards every quarter where 3 to 6 individuals will be selected from across the country that work for us and nominated by their peers and selected as a core value recipient of excellence or faithful stewardship or respectful relationships. And it brings it to life when you see a person that's modeling it, and you get to celebrate that together, and others get to have a picture in their mind about what it really looks like to live this forward. So that's one of the ways we are avoiding the drift in our organization, is to continually double down by celebrating the great parts of our culture and encouraging that as in many ways we can. So I love the define, protect, and celebrate.
Yeah, and I think another part of that piece is storytelling, and it's very much related to what you say, but to telling this story, especially thinking of the rich history of Blue Trust, telling those early day stories and of the founder, and continuing to tell those stories, and even just stories of how you're receiving things like servant leadership lived out. Like these things really help bring color to the culture of an organization.
That brings to mind, we've done some recording. We have some key people who've been with us a really long time. And as they begin to leave to go on to the next chapter that the Lord has for them, we've made an intentional effort to record some of those stories and have them for the next generation to hear. We've done that with families as well, as the matriarch and patriarch, get up in age, and we want to do that. So thanks for bringing that up. That's an important way that you can capture and then ultimately celebrate what it means, what your mission and values are.
Absolutely. And now, I mean, it's easy to do. You can just take a quick selfie video on your phone if you really want to. So we try to give practical advice like that for leaders, really help them preserve preserve those stories so that others can see them, whether you share it in onboarding or in leadership development, what have you. You have these resources available to preserve that beautiful culture that takes decades to build and months to undo.
Well, Becca, I've enjoyed learning through the Lead on Mission book. I encourage others to grab it, but I know they're excited about it. But tell us where we can get it, Becca.
Absolutely. I'm sure you've heard of Amazon. That is where I recommend going to get it.
Excellent. So check it out on Amazon and Lead on Mission. Becca, thank you for joining us today. Thanks for sharing more of your insights that you learned in a practical way. And I'm excited to share this with our listeners. And thank you too, listeners, for joining us. Hope you have a blessed day.
Thank you so much for listening to the Wisdom for Wealth for Life podcast, brought to you by Blue Trust. Thanks so much for listening, and please subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you are seeking financial advice, please contact us at 800-987-2987. That's 800-987-2987. Or email us at info@bluetrust.com. That's info@bluetrust.com. Trust and investment management accounts and services offered by Blue Trust are not insured by the FDIC or any other federal government agency, are not deposits or other obligations of, nor guaranteed by any bank or bank affiliate, and are subject to investment risk, including possible loss of the principal amount invested. The information in these podcasts is provided for general educational purposes only. It is not intended as specific individual advice. The client's experience may not be representative of the experience of other clients, and they are also not indicative of future performance or success. Opinions expressed may not be those of Blue Trust.